Sometimes food culture is built off of the simplest of concepts. If you take 2, maybe 3 items and put them together, you get yourself a combination of some sort. Sometimes the results are alright, nothing special, but just the right ingredients at the right amounts will often get you a flavor combination that is bold and will keep you and your taste buds clamoring for more. I think that out of the countless food choices and combinations we've made over the millennia, it doesn't get as simple and effective as bread and something between it. Sandwiches are, without doubt, one of the most common foods all over the world. The concept is simple. Take 2 pieces of bread, add fillings, squish them down, and enjoy a delicious, probably nutritious meal that you can carry anywhere. But not all sandwiches are created equal. Everywhere you go probably is a twist on the sando formula in some strange way. While I'll be happy to delve into the regional specialties of my home at some point, a friend of mine suggested I try my hand at making something I've never done before: a cheesesteak sandwich. I was surprised by the request, but the more I thought about it, the more fun it sounded. I'm always up for a challenge in the kitchen, and the city of Philadelphia isn't somewhere I plan on going to in the very near future, so I'll allow myself to learn something new for once. So today, we're gonna hope I don't offend an entire city and talk about the meaty, cheesy, and quite stuffed full cheesesteak sandwich. So, let's go back to what I said earlier. Sandwiches are, without doubt, one of the most common foods all over the world. Every sandwich has its day, and country, and state, and city, you get the idea. But of course, we have to discuss where the sandwich comes from. While it's true the Earl of Sandwich is described as being the first person of relative modernity to make the term sandwich popular, sandwiches are easily far older than the beef and bread that the Earl was given all those years ago. The concept is simple. Take 2 pieces of bread, or bread-adjacent items, and place something, meat, vegetables, or anything else in between. It's a simple, portable meal that can be packed for a long journey or for easy access later in the day. It can be filling or just enough to push you through the rest of your day. Add a sauce and a side of some sort and you can make the sandwich a very versatile meal for a very agreeable price. Now, what does all of that have to do with regionality and the cheesesteak specifically? Well, because it's virtually impossible to correctly find the origins of the general item known as the sandwich, we have to assume it was all over the place. As a result, you would use whatever you had around you to make said sandwich. Depending on where you lived, you could have an abundance of chicken or access to pigs. Maybe the altitude made the bread nice and airy, or the cheeses you can find have to be used in the span of a few days or weeks, or maybe you even had some fruit that you had to get rid of. Whatever the case may be, you taking those items together and putting them into something would often be the difference between a boring struggle meal and good eats. Apparently, the Philly cheesesteak is special. It is said that it was made around the 1930s out of the need for a man named Pat Olivieri to innovate something. Taking some beef and cheese and putting it on a grill, he added this to a little loaf of bread that was likely something he had on hand. He added onions to it and managed to sell the creation pretty easily. In the area, it was unique enough for people to follow the man's creation and give it a cult following. Nowadays, the city of Philly seems to make the cheesesteak multiple ways. It has to have cheese sauce, not provolone, bell peppers with onions, or cheap steak instead of ribeye. It's so crazy that the culture is split up, and all because one guy decided to innovate instead of making a hot dog or something. With this in mind, we could see that the sandwich is something special. It's loved by people all over the states and maybe the world, and we have a recipe here that hopefully honors the Philly in some way. And if it doesn't, I'm probably never going to that area for fear that I will be drawn and quartered in the streets. The components of the Philly follow the same sandwich principles we all know and love, so we can break the main focuses down into a couple primary ingredients: the bread, the steak, and the cheese. Granted, there are a couple more things in the sandwich than these, but these are the blanket items we need to consider. The bread is the shell of the sandwich and will need to hold everything securely without falling apart. Naturally, you'll get something like a submarine roll or a hoagie roll or maybe something similar. My best advice is to use something easy to come across in your own locality. Second is the steak or beef. While I'm not going to bother you about what to use, ribeye seems to be the most common meat aside from maybe ground meat. If you can find thinly sliced meat in your area, go for it and use that. I myself am using a whole ribeye and will slice it to my needs, but again, use something you can maneuver around with easily. Finally, cheese is to preference, but the two groups I often see most contended with is either neon orange cheese sauce that has all the salt you'll need for this recipe, or provolone cheese. I'm sticking with the latter since I like the taste of the stuff, but maybe we can come back to this topic in a separate video. Now the recipe I'm using comes from the blog spot Natasha's Kitchen. I'll leave a link down below, but I'll be taking a few personal liberties that you can choose to follow if you want to. With all the preamble out of the way, I think we can begin from the top, shall we? To start, we'll be contending a bit with the steak we've gotten. Here I have a full ribeye. Notice here how the meat has little stripes of fat throughout the meat. That's called marbling and shows a better quality of cut overall. We'll talk about it in a video coming soon, but steaks come in all sizes and shapes, so we'll be sure to use this one to the best of our ability to honor our fallen cattle friend. The first thing I'm doing is salting this steak. You'll take whatever seasoning you have, I'm using kosher salt, and evenly coating all sides of the steak. And yes, even the edges too. We'll then put this steak in the refrigerator for a couple of hours and let the salt absorb into the meat. The last 45 minutes before cooking, we'll place the meat into the freezer to let it firm up. This is important to get our slices as thin as possible, and it also gives us time to prepare the rest of our meal. Next, we're taking a medium to large onion and giving it a dice. It doesn't have to be perfect, my dicing isn't perfect either, and that's alright. I myself am only using half of this large onion. Take your time with the slicing and watch your fingers. Soon enough, you'll have little onion bits that will move to the side for just a moment. Grab yourself a pan and set it on the stove. Turn the heat to medium, and when the pan is hot, add some oil, followed by your onions. Cook the onions for a few minutes before turning the heat down to low. Add a bit of salt and pepper and begin the long process of browning. We want to caramelize the onions, break them down and soften them. The slow cooking will bring out these complex sugars inside of the onion instead of burning them and leaving them bitter. The longer you go, the darker they will get. You can add a touch of water to keep them moist as they go through 50 shades of brown. This process takes a while. After around 30 minutes, I decided to pull them off the heat, but cooking times vary based on heating element and a bunch of other stuff. When your onions are sweet and softened and brown, take them off the heat and set them aside. We'll clean the pan and put it back on the stove for the meat portion of the video. Next, take your steak out of the freezer and place it on your cutting board. Use a sharp knife and begin slicing your steak as thinly as you can manage. Here you can see my slices are pretty thin. My knife is super sharp, and so I'll be sure to take my time and slice the whole steak up. From here you can cut half of yours and use the other half, or you can slice it all and freeze half for something else. Whatever you decide, take the amount you will use and set it aside. I have 2 more pans at the ready that I'll be using. I'm going to set down one small one for fries, or chips to some of you, and a bigger pan to toast some bread. If you're making fries, fill a pan with oil and turn the heat on to medium. The bread pan I've turned to low and will let it heat up while we prepare the meat for cooking. Yeah, this is going pretty fast. I'm tackling the meat first, so we'll turn the heat on to medium-high and add a bit of neutral oil to the pan. Once the oil coats the pan and is nice and hot, add your thin sliced steak in a nice, even layer. When the meat gains some color, take it out of the pan and into a separate bowl for now, and add your next batch. You'll repeat this process until all of the meat is par cooked and set aside. Once all of our meat is partially cooked, I'll move over to my bread pan. I'm using a local style French loaf since it's soft on the inside but flaky and crispy on the outside. Slice the bread 3/4 of the way through and add butter and a touch of oil to the pan. When the butter is melted, add your bread to the pan and let the bread toast for a few minutes to your desired doneness. I'm also adding frozen fries to the oil-filled pan. Nothing to say here other than to be very careful. If you have ice on your fries, prepare for some resistance from the immortal Fry Legion. Now with everything going on, you'll need to do a bit of multitasking, but it's not too difficult. You'll do flawlessly. I've got my meat pan turned up to medium again, and I'm adding all of my meat into it. I'm also adding my onions into the pan and giving them a mix together with a spatula. When the meat and onions are mixed, I'm going to add a bit of freshly cracked pepper and then split the meat up into 2 portions. Since it's just me, the second will be put away and set aside for a later meal. The current portion I'm going to add 3 slices of provolone cheese to. Add slice after slice until the meat is blanketed with the cheese. Let the cheese melt down on top of the meat and move to check on the bread. The bread should be golden brown and ready to receive our meat. Bring the bread onto a plate or a clean cutting board. Use a spatula, preferably longer than the one that I have, and place the meat, cheese, and onions onto the toasted bread. When all the meat is transferred, just quickly slide the spatula from under the meat to finish the transfer. Finally, I'm going to add a bit of a curveball. The recipe calls for a spread of mayonnaise on the bread itself beforehand. So, I've got some Kewpie mayonnaise, and I'll add a nice drizzle right on top before closing the sandwich up and wrapping the whole thing up in wax paper. The wax paper step is optional, but it will allow the whole sandwich to steam and get all ready to be cut in half. Finally, we're ready to cut the cheesesteak. Cut through its wax paper wrapper and transfer the still hot sandwich onto the plate with the fries. With all of this done, you have a full spread that's as appetizing as it is pretty. This whole process only took a few hours of prep and very little time in the kitchen actually cooking, aside from the onions, of course. Tasting this sandwich was honestly a flavor bomb I was not expecting. It was savory, salty, cheesy, meaty, and a bit sweet from the caramelized onion. The recipe initially called for a spread of regular mayonnaise, but the Kewpie mayo is a bit more acidic and has this umami flavor that is accenting the sandwich with every bite. With the nice crispy fries, this is an easy recipe and is 100% doable and worth doing. I think the only thing I'd change is having a bigger stomach. I'd eat 14 of them right now. And that's it. This is my first time making a Philly cheesesteak, but I'm glad I got talked into it. I was going to make just a steak video, but this blew it out of the water, no questions asked. This recipe is quick, and if you prepare accordingly, you can really have this on a plate in under an hour of actual cooking. As someone who always loves a good sandwich, I highly recommend this recipe if you want to spice things up. Sandwiches are a representation of the people that make them, and this one is simple, honest, and in your face, just like the city it comes from, and not at all in a bad way. It proves that if you want some adventure, try another culture on for size. You never know how different the sandwich game is a few states, or countries, over. If you like this video, please consider giving it a like. I have a few videos on the back burner and they should be out in quick succession. Feel free to comment down below about your favorite sandwich, and if it's interesting enough, I'll be sure to try it out on the channel. I'm linking the original recipe in the description too. It's really straightforward and I think everyone will like it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see me cook more and if you like stuff like this. I'd love to keep sharing my love of food with you all, and I'm pretty sure you're going to like eating whatever I bring to your table. With all that said, I've got more of a sandwich to eat. This was really good. So with that, I'll see you dogs later.